Hello and welcome to the Political Orphanage, a home for those who feel homeless in today's political hellscape. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton. And as the host of a semi-prominent political podcast, I get a lot of requests from authors to come on the show and talk about their new book. If it's interesting, I bring them on. If it's just a polemicist screed, I politely turn them down. For example, there are plenty of tomes that have titles like Demon Rats, Why the Democratic Party is Ruining America and What You Can Do About It, or The Devil's Hand Towel, How Progressivism is Literally a Satanic Institution, literally. Stuff like that. It always has a dumb title, and it always has a colon. There's always a subtitle. Usually a ghostwriter, too, since the person writing it is a talking head in the media, probably doesn't have the patience or maybe the skill to actually write a book. For example, I will not mention the person or network, but a friend of mine is on one of these networks, and they recently approached him and went, "Hey, we wrote a book. We want to put your name on it so you can go on shows and we'll sell it and we'll cut a deal with you." He wasn't even going to be involved in the process. Now, I never bring on guests like that because I find those books absurdly, amazingly boring. They are so boring. I never learn anything from them. They're just saying, our team is the good team, the other team is the bad team, over and over and over again for $12.99. Recently, the PR team for Cenk Uygur reached out with his new book, Justice is Coming, How Progressives Are Going to Take Over the Country and America is Going to Love It. And I thought, okay, I'll bite. Let's do an episode where I talk to a polemicist, someone who is not exploring a central idea but is making the case that there is a good team and an evil team, and then litanizes why the evil team is evil and why it's blindingly obvious everybody should root for the good team. Basically, the exact opposite of the program you are listening to. Let's bring on one of those guys and see what happens. A very big name at that. If you don't know Cenk Uygur, he is a man with a large audience and larger lungs. He's a known commodity. There's several million people that watch him on a regular basis, so he's a prominent figure in the media landscape. On today's program, you are going to hear an episode in 2 acts. Act 1, I talked to Cenk about polemics. This is the only episode of the Political Orphanage where I've ever kicked off an interview by telling the guest what I didn't like about their book. I'm not a dick about it. I don't want to just yell at him, but I do want to discuss it with him. Because in my mind, Cenk and Sean Hannity basically share the same worldview, the same equation, just different variables. From my vantage point, polemicists are sort of their own vocational class, and I don't particularly care whether they're blue or red. To me, same equation, same damage to the country. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the veracity and usefulness of that good team, evil team mindset in accomplishing whatever your goals are. Act 2. Let's talk about what you want to do without using terms, labels. And that's because it occurs to me, pretty late in the game, in fact, that a significant amount of the arguments I have in politics regularly are really just squabbling over terms or implications of what I think the terms mean. As you'll see today, I disagree with Cenk's definitions of what constitutes progressivism, conservatism, and socialism. I think his terms are loaded, to say the least. You will almost certainly disagree with one, if not all of those terms as he uses them. But I didn't want to spend an hour squabbling with him over definitions. I thought that would be a waste of your time and my time and his time. So early on, I try out something novel. I don't think I've ever done this on the program before either. I tell him, we're going to let you define all of the terms today. Whatever your definition is, that is the definition we will use, so that we can skip ahead to what you're actually trying to do and what ideas inform those actions, because that's ultimately what I'm interested in. And the weird thing is, I'm pretty sure Cenk and I would disagree on a number of economic and juridical positions. There's plenty for us to fight over, but less than I thought. If Cenk had come on and kicked things off with, America should be more socialist, and I yelled, over my dead body, we would have wound up fighting about two very different things because he means something different than I do. On my end, I've noticed this recently. I spend so much time in the creative community. I'm a comedian, so I hang out with a lot of comedians and actors, and I spend so much time in that community talking politics with people who care deeply about economic justice and yet have literally never read a book on economics and think corporations are evil and that poverty is caused by greed, and if we could only outlaw greed and put government in charge of things, that would solve everything. And I become very defensive of markets as a result. My antennas are up because I strongly believe that markets have lifted billions of people out of poverty in my lifetime. Billions. And if economic illiterates succeed in smothering them, they will immiserate billions more. And much of the agenda I am pursuing is to alleviate suffering. So I'm kind of knee-jerk about that at this point. When I start hearing people talk about markets, capitalism, socialism, things like that, I get my hackles get up. Yet, when Cenk and I, in today's episode, got away from the definitions of capitalism and socialism, we didn't fight about them. I'm going to be honest with you, I couldn't quite bring myself to just wholly accept his definition. I did at least have to provide a counter definition, but we don't fight about it. We still disagree on stuff, but we at least avoid arguing about stupid things that neither of us believe. And I think a lot of political conversations, that is a regular feature, is that there's an implication, there's baggage associated with a term, and we wind up fighting about dumb crap neither of us actually thinks. We're living in a really weird time right now where people don't really care what you think. They care how you say it. Are you saying red team coded stuff or blue team coded stuff? Did you say patriot or justice? Most people, when they are arguing about politics, are not arguing about a policy or an idea. They're arguing that their team is the good team and the other team is a bad team. And you used a totem of your team, the bad team. So I am now going to attack you on behalf of my tribe because I feel that my tribe is under attack. You invoked a profane belief. So I am going to respond with my team's sacred beliefs. Basically, on my end, I want to get to the country to the point where we can have passionate, good arguments about important things instead of stupid arguments about fake controversies. So today, I am bringing on a guest specifically calibrated to draw me into a shouting match. And we're going to see if we can avoid doing that. If we can avoid getting into a dumb rock'em sock'em robots conversation. I'm going to try to do it right here on the Political Orphanage. My guest today is Cenk Uygur. He is the founder and CEO of TYT Network. He is the host of the Young Turks, and he is the co-founder of Justice Democrats, whose ranks include Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He is the author of Justice is Coming, How Progressives Are Going to Take Over the Country and America is Going to Love It. Very excited to talk to you, Cenk. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
So you're on a show called The Political Orphanage. I am an independent. I have voted Democrat more than I voted Republican recently, but I'm not in the can for either party, and that could easily shift either way. I found your book very polemic, and I found it to be there are two sides, one side's evil, one side's good. And for people like me that have opted out of the system, that's a big turnoff. So is kind of your work, are you just trying to animate progressives to get out and vote and you're not worrying about anybody else? Are you trying to get people disaffected? Kind of what is your goal?
Yeah. So, Andrew, I'm curious about what you thought about it because in parts, I'm clearly not in favor of Republicans.
Yeah, I don't feel like you pull any punches, and I should say you're also kind of joking around too. So it's not like you're writing like a screed, but I do feel like the viewpoint's very clear, and I found it to be very red versus blue.
Right, but that's what I want to press on because at the same time, I would argue that I had arguments in favor of conservatives that you would never find in a Democratic book or a progressive book. That the core of the conservative voters care about corruption. And that is the number one issue, and they woke up to the problem of corruption and mainstream media earlier than Democratic voters did, and progressive voters, I think, are about the same time, if not earlier. But for core Democratic voters, I would say their core Republican voters did better on that issue and the top issue. And I think they got misdirected by Trump. But I explained that the need for conservatives, that you need to have a balancing act in terms of where should taxes be. They could be too low, they could be too high. How much regulation should we have? They could be too low, they could be too high. So did that not assuage your bipartisan need, or were you just like so put off by how anti-Republican I was?
Well, two things. One of the things in the book that I loved that actually did gain a lot of credit with me was you bring up AB 5 in California, which I think is a great example of governmental overreach. And I did videos about it being a horrible idea, and like I was doing it out of what I believe is very good motivation. And like you point that out, like, look, this is a step that went too far, regardless of what the intent was. AB 5, this is the gig economy stuff, right? Went too far, right? You do have a clause in there about how a functional democracy would have kind of the change makers and the people that are keeping it from going too far. I think the elements that I found off-putting more were, I found it to be very, very reductive of both sides. Please correct me on any of this, but you define progressivism as expanding the circle of liberty, equality of opportunity, and justice.
Justice for all.
Okay, justice for all, right? I agree with all of those things. By your definition, while we can quibble about the labels, I don't really want to do that today. Let's just use your labels. By your definition, I am a progressive. You were progressive. When you get into conservatism, you define conservatism, or you use a philosopher and say that it is the philosophy of upholding privilege for the elite or the upper class, and then go on to say, being somewhat pithy, come for the racism, stay for the tax breaks. And then there was a quote that the Republican Party is a Frankensteinian coalition of grievances. Hold on, I got this. The resentful, the willfully uninformed, and the greedy. Like those seem to me to be the much more frequent portrayal in your book. You did occasionally have a clause of there might be somebody who's decent, but for the most part, it seemed to me that you were almost waging like religious warfare on a political level of like there's a good holy team and an evil team, and that is what that kind of worldview of good team, bad team I found to be very off-putting.
Yeah. Okay, so let's tackle that. So number one, you're not wrong. Kirkus Reviews, one of the biggest reviewers of books, said that the Republicans come in for a shellacking in the book. And they do. Okay, and they've richly deserved. And so you're not wrong that I do not religious but political warfare. And I often talk about that and confess to that, which is that, and there's a reason why I do it. So if people that know me in my personal life, I'm pretty easygoing guy, really happy, knock on wood, let's hope nothing changes, etc. But when they see me on Twitter or they see me on select clips where I'm yelling, screaming, etc. online, they think, wow, this guy's got to be the angriest man in America, right? And so there's the reason for that is, as I explained in chapter 4, progressive lost the Democratic Party. They're now a corporate-ruled, corporate-dominated party, which, again, find me a Democrat that says that anywhere, right? So acknowledging the massive problems of the Democratic Party already is way more open-minded than anyone else you'll find on the left. So since we lost that party, all we have is a bunch of paid weaklings on the Democratic side, whose job is to go, oh, there is nothing I can do. I have to give the rich everything. The Republicans are so mean. You don't understand. Okay. So I have no use for those weaklings. And so that leaves an empty space for a gladiator on the left. Okay. We desperately, desperately need more warriors. So you show me a left-wing warrior, and I'm a fan of that person. So Nina Turner, Bernie Sanders, AOC originally. There are some issues, though, okay? And so we'll come back to those issues. So, but in terms of, like, what is wrong with the Republican Party that I will not back up, okay, is it obsessed with tax cuts for the rich? Is it 98% of what the Republican Party does? Yes. definitively, empirically. They could say all they want. Oh, yo, we hate immigrants, or blah, 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 or we're concerned about immigrants, etc., right? Or we're concerned about crime. If for the voters, it's true. They are concerned about crime. They are concerned about immigration, and those are legitimate issues, okay? For the politicians, the leaders, the hosts, all 100% full of crap. All they care about is tax cuts for the rich, deregulation of giant corporations, maintaining the status quo and corporate power. So the right wing has heard the term uniparty. It is real, and I am confirming it for you from the left. Okay, so but did the Republican Party run the Southern strategy? Does it still run the Southern strategy? Yes. Is the Southern strategy, hey, racists in the South, come vote for us instead of the Dixiecrats, the Democrats, because they gave you Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, and you guys don't like that. You like being on top. The Republicans will be just as racist as you need to be. Okay, is that true for the Republican Party? You're totally and utterly lying to yourself if you think that's not true. That's just a historical fact. Right?
So, two things actually. Okay, like with the Civil Rights Act, I look at the Civil Rights Act from 1964, and what I see is a civil war going in inside the Democratic Party, with the Republicans coming in as the kingmaker. Because at the time, the Democrats were preeminent. They'd been running the country since right after Eisenhower. And as you point out, there's the Dixiecrats, right? So there's the Jim Crow South Democrats. There's also the Martin Luther King Jr.'s of the world. And the debate's basically taking place within the Democratic Party. The Republican Party comes in and votes in favor of it. And Barry Goldwater does not, but proportionally more Republicans vote in favor of it than not. So I look at that and I see, okay, this is an issue that is not linked lockstep between conservatives, Republicans, progressive Democrats. There's more levels to this. There's different levels that are going on.
No.
Does that sound about right to you?
It does, but you're stopping the time frame in the wrong place. Everything you said is absolutely accurate. That's not the issue. And God bless the Republicans that voted for the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. God bless Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans that fought the Civil War and kept the Union together. Back when the Republicans were the Progressive Party, Teddy Roosevelt, terrific president in a lot of ways, Republican and a progressive. So that actually used to exist back in the day. But when you go forward just a little bit more forward in time, Andrew, as you know, Richard Nixon then decided, oh, wait, we shouldn't have put it
right.
Civil Rights Act.
He does the Southern.
Let's do the Southern strategy where we go eliminate those Dixiecrats, pick up those seats for the Republicans, and we do that by being against civil rights. You could be polite and say against civil rights. You could be mean and say racist, etc. And by the way, if you're a Republican now or you're a conservative now, you weren't there in 1965 or 1968 or 72 when they made these decisions. You don't have to co-sign it. I was a Republican. I was a Republican past that time, right? But I didn't know. Once I found out, oh, this is the party that is actively against civil rights. Well, I'm for civil rights. So that's why I part of the reason why I left the Republican.
Okay, well then let's break it down a little bit further. I guess one of the other things that I do see a difference in, or at least I think I do, is for me, the Republican and Democratic parties aren't really parties. They're a coalition of a bunch of other parties. So like I look at like the Democratic Party, and you've got Justice Democrats that have AOC in it, and then you've got like New Democrats. So like I really like you call them out in the book. You don't like these guys, but I like Colorado Democrats like Hickenlooper and Jared Polis and things like that. They strike me as pro-market Democrats. But we can at least say there's different factions within the Democratic Party. And I think we can also say that about the Republican Party, that the Republican Party has like the weird evangelical groups a la Asa Hutchinson, but it also has the like Rand Paul libertarians. And there's a tiny clutch of old liberal Rockefeller Republicans that are still running around, like Governor Scott up in Vermont. So so sort of summarizing the whole Republican Party as a monolithic thing, or the Democratic Party as a monolithic thing, strikes me as counterproductive to advancing the progress you extol.
So, Andrew, I hear you on that. And those are all fair. There are definitely factions within both parties. And I think the factions that you laid out are pretty accurate. But let's not leave out the giant factions, which is, for Democrats, I would say 85 to 90% of the party is corporate Democrats that just do exactly what their donors tell them to do. And for Republicans, if we're being honest, it's about 99% of federal, not state, federal politicians that are in the corporate uniparty. And by the way, a lot of Trump supporters know that. And now we're talking about the politicians. I'm going to get to the biggest distinction in a second.
Okay.
And that's why a lot of Trump supporters, a lot of MAGA guys go, I hate Mitch McConnell. And I totally respect that. And I'm about the only Democrat that says, I got no love for Nancy Pelosi. Okay. And so the Democrats are furious when you say that. When I say, okay, so Mitch McConnell took $1 billion in corporate donations, is he evil? Every Democrat says, of course he is, terrible guy, corrupt, etc. I go, now Nancy Pelosi, I'll have you know, took $1 billion from corporate donations. Is she evil? They go, how dare you? She's an angel, right? So that's absurd. It's absurd on its face. They both take the money. They're both uniparty. And I think a lot of conservatives would agree with me on that, right? And so now the biggest distinction in the Republican Party is not between those different factions among politicians. Yeah, Rand Paul exists. Matt Gaetz is a universe in and of himself. You want to say, Cenk, you're wrong. It's 95% of the politicians, not 99%. Okay, fine. That's normal disagreement, okay? But the real distinction is between the voters and the politicians. So, yeah, for the voters, again, I'm much tougher on the voters than anyone in mainstream media is, and maybe probably even more tougher on the voters than any Democrat is. But I'm also fairer to the voters than any Democrat or left-winger, because I think the voters, they actually are authentic. They have no reason to lie. And on the parts that I agree with them, which is actually a ton of things, we can get great agreement. On the things that we disagree on, there's nothing wrong with fighting. That's called democracy, right? But at least they're coming at it from an honest and authentic point of view instead of the scummy politicians who all lie for a living and serve corporate interests.
Now you're speaking my language. I would prefer that the relevant distinction be garden variety humans and politicians. To me, these are very, very distinct differences. And I hadn't really considered that, but that's an interesting take, in that I think most people, when they're describing the electorate, regardless of where they're coming from, the idea is the electorate is munificent and wonderful, and they've been deluded by bad leaders. And you do not take that tack. You take the tack that, no, they're shitbags a lot of the time, and you're going to hold them accountable for it. Is that kind of the position? So it's not that the Republicans have been tricked. They are bad.
Yeah. And so, and by the way, if you're a Republican or conservative out there, aren't you tired of mainstream media patronizing you? Like, they think that you're worse than I think you are, but they don't say it. They kiss your ass in some bullshit patronizing way, right? Oh, it's really the heart of the country, and we really appreciate real Americans. We're not talking about that. We're only talking about Trump. Well, who put Trump in charge? You guys did. Okay, so who are we kidding? Who are we kidding? You had 17 choices. You picked Trump. Now, I know why you picked Trump, and I'm more generous about why you picked Trump than any other Democrat. Okay, but I'm not going to baby. I'm going to treat you as adults and grown-ups. So, like, where I think I see the race issues, I'll point them out. Where I see the bigotry, etc., I'll point it out. And you want to fight over that? Great. I'm a fighter. Let's fight. Okay? But on economic issues, we agree so much. Like, stop taking the bait. Like, go ahead and fight me on trans issues and all that stuff, right? But stop taking the bait to not talk about the things that we agree on, right? And we agree on so many economic issues. And the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are playing good cop, bad cop. And Fox News and MSNBC are playing good cop, bad cop. And the whole point is to distract you and get you to hate me and me to hate you. And we never actually get to paid family leave, so moms can take 12 weeks off after they have a baby, which conservatives definitely want and progressives definitely want. Well, the Republican and Democratic voters wanted it in overwhelming margins. The only people who don't want it are scumbag politicians who get paid for it by corporations to not do paid family leave. I can give you many other examples. So yes, the voters have the good, the bad, and the ugly on both sides, okay? And yes, we can mix it up. But at some point, if we don't unite on the things that we agree on, we're being played for fools by the uniparty.
This is great. I want you to elaborate on this, because I agree with you very much that mainstream media is it is using the politics of fear and hatred to accumulate money and power. And I think the two major parties are doing that too. I think that the reason that electoral reform is so fought tooth and nail by both parties is that it's a lot easier to run based on fear and hatred than it is to run on appealing to you. So I'm with you in total agreement on that. That being said, given how charged the book is, how are you not playing into that by saying that red team is this awful thing that must be smashed, and then we'll enter a millennial period of progressive utopia? How are you distinct from that?
Yeah. So I'm distinct from that in all the ways that, first of all, that I've already explained, where I give credit to the conservative voters on the things that they deserve credit on. I distinguish them from the politicians, which is very important to do. And I talk about all the things that we do agree about. So those are giant, giant differences. Now, in terms of the electoral battle, I'm not naive. And so there are some folks who are now what I call the fake left. So I would put Tulsi Gabbard in that category, for example. So Tulsi Gabbard goes on Fox News and goes, "Oh my God, I'm such a progressive. But golly, gee, the Republicans are right about everything. And you know what? I think you should all vote for Republicans." And that's me as a Democrat saying that. That's bullshit. She doesn't believe any of that. She's just looking for the money. Okay?
We're kind of like Max Boot at the at Washington Post might be like that. If like every article is I'm a conservative, but the conservatives are evil. That kind of person.
I got no interest in, I don't know much about Max Boot, but I hear you on that. And I got no interest in that kind of person, et cetera. And hence, Andrew, I'm not going to vote for Trump. There is no planet on which I vote for Trump. So, like, the right wing thinks, a lot of times their leaders do at least, the Tucker Carlsons of the world think, hey, I'm going to give you a little bit of fame and money here. So, Tulsi, come on here and kiss my ass and tell everybody to vote for the Republicans. And then later, the Republicans will be nice to you. No, the Republicans do not have a track record of being nice to anyone, especially on the left, minorities, etc. Let's be honest, you could catch feelings over it, but the Republicans have a terrible track record of that. Now, if you say, hey, the Democrats have a bad track record, no, Democrats, since the corporate takeover of the party, have a terrible track record on just serving corporate donors, right? But they don't go around saying white people are a problem, straight people are a problem, we have to pass bills against them. We can't, all the parents need to know about these white people. We have to stop teaching the history of white people, okay? Because it's this, that, or the other thing. We can't ever mention straight people. It's evil. Like, that's the kind of weirdo stuff the Republicans do. And just own it. Just own it. Fight me on it, okay? But then let's agree on paid family leave. Let's agree on corruption. Let's agree on taking money out of politics. So I'm not going to baby you, and I'm not going to vote for Trump or any of these right-wing zealots, right? But once the voting is done, will I vote with Matt Gaetz? Would I counsel AOC or Ro Khanna to vote with Matt Gaetz on his anti-corruption bill? Yes, I would, because I'll take yes for an answer.
Okay. I still feel that, from my perspective, you're in a fairly polemic position. However, I will move past that because I don't want to just relitigate that the entire thing. In terms of tactics, so like if you ran for...
Hold on, one last thing. Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you name me an honest Republican? Like, name me an honest Republican that I could vote for, that is not going to steal my money and give it to corporate donors, and that is not going to drive anti-LGBTQ bills all throughout the country, and is not going to do this horrible rhetoric that they do. Name me one decent person, and then we'll have a conversation.
Okay. I mean, like, a few months ago, I interviewed, it's a local guy. Is that okay, or does this have to be like a federal position?
Oh, I see. Well, the local guys I'm not going to know, but
okay.
Yeah.
I don't really keep a list in my pocket of like honest politicians for this reason. I don't like to put my faith in princes. So I do kind of think that back to that distinction we made of voter versus politician, I think 99% of voters deep down believe it's better for me to make the compromise to stay in office and be on the inside. So people that, didn't like Trump suddenly like Trump over time.
Yeah.
But I do reject the premise that there's like a good party and a bad party and it's monolithic. And we're like, I've talked to conservatives and I've fought with them about this, incidentally, where I went on a big show about 2 years ago where it was 4 years ago now because it was in the presidential elections. They were ranking Democratic presidential candidates. And like, I came in with notes and stuff to talk about who I liked and who I didn't like. And it became very clear very quickly that they were like, every single Democrat is worse than the worst Republican. And I was like, well, that's just crazy. Like, there are Republicans and Democrats that I would vote for. Like right now, there are Democrats and Republicans that I would vote for. I'd look at it person by person. But the idea that there's just kind of like the evil team that must be stopped, that's the fundamental thing. Or can I back up a little bit? Do you really think there's just two teams? Is it that reductive? Do you think there are more than two teams?
No, as we talked about earlier, there are many teams, many factions, and the biggest one is the uniparty, and it's all a fake fight to begin with. But guys, like on the social issues, we're probably at an impasse because a lot of conservatives will not vote for anyone who says that trans people should have equal rights, right? And so, yeah, the hatred of that group is so overwhelming that it just clouds their judgment, in my opinion, okay? And I'm not going to vote for anyone that says, well, I'm going to take away some of your rights. No deal, never. Okay.
So we are very much, I think we're probably in agreement on all social issues, are very close. We could find something to quibble about, but you and I are both very, very pluralistic, tolerant, I would say hedonist, of like, as long as you're not hurting anybody, do whatever you want. So I think we're probably on the same board there. But like, yeah. I do think you could make inroads with conservatives on that. Like, I'm from Oklahoma. Like, if I were trying to pitch a conservative on this, I would be like, look, I'm from Oklahoma, and it's very important to me to treat people politely and respectfully. That's part of our culture. And part of that is that I'm going to identify people however they want, because that's basic etiquette. And if they're not hurting anybody in their own home, by God, as an American, it's your right to do whatever you want. But I think that that's a better tactic than going like, look, you're just fundamentally a bigot, and you guys are evil, and you need to quit being you and become us. I think that there's a better way to bring them over to the position that doesn't attack their core identity.
Yeah, Andrew, I actually totally agree with that. And so let me give you a couple of examples of how I'm balanced there that some in your audience might be surprised by. So for example, some of the trans activists online now think that I'm a Republican and borderline Nazi because of some of my views on transition. So what are my really controversial opinions against trans rights according to them? One is that even though I think trans girls should be allowed to play in high school sports, I don't want kids having their genitals checked by anybody, any grown-ups, etc. I think the professional leagues get to make their own decisions, and if they want to exclude trans women, for example, from the WNBA, I think that's the WNBA's prerogative, okay? And trans activists, some, not all, but some trans activists say, how dare you Nazi? We have to force all the sports leagues to take trans women. Sorry, I don't agree. And you're not going to get me to agree. And by the way, neither does 98% of America. No, that's on that one, maybe it's around somewhere between 70 to 90%. On the other one, like my co-host, Anna Kasparian, said that, hey, I don't want to be called a birthing person or a person with a uterus. I'm a woman and I want to be called a woman. And that apparently also made her and me by association Nazis, etc. And that's insane. And I tell my left-wing allies, such as they are, if they consider me allies, and that's questionable at this point, 98% of Americans want to be called a woman and not a person with a uterus. Mm-hmm. And if you call 98% of Americans Nazis, one, you're wrong, okay? And number two, you're kind of a dum-dum. And so you're going to lose every election. And by the way, you're not going to protect trans rights. And Andrew, to your point, 2/3 of Americans, including a lot of decent, honorable conservatives, and certainly tons of independents, say, no, trans people should have the same rights. They should have the same rights in employment, housing, all of these things. So we're disagreeing around the edges, and those edges are what's like minuscule issues that then drive the hatred and that drive the division, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get past those minuscule issues. Now, there are also large issues like crime, where I do not have the standard left-wing position, and I've taken tremendous heat for that as well. But I believe in common sense, and I believe in justice for all, not just some. And so what I tell conservatives all the time is when we fight for higher wages for all Americans, we're not dirtbags. We're not going to be like, oh, but not right-wingers. Don't give the Republicans any raises. No, it's higher wages for everyone. If you can't have justice for some. It creates an imbalance and it creates conflict. You have to have justice for all, and that means all of us.
Great. So let's move. I want to move on to stuff that we agree on, because I actually think there's a lot of overlap. But I will say that I think that you've hit the head on kind of the crux of the problem that I have with the book is I think that I have a greater range of good faith arguments that I'm engaging in the same way that you bring up AB 5, and there were well-intentioned people that were opposed to that. And there are people that would identify as conservative that we would view as pro-transgender or pro-equality. I see that as much larger. And I think you typically, or you tend to conflate the Republican Party with what I view as like the lowest 10% of it, whereas I tend to view it as the better part. That being said, I want to see how much we agree on, because I actually suspect it's a lot. Let's talk about drugs. I would immediately legalize marijuana and all psychedelics, and I think I'd probably decriminalize everything else and treat it as a medical problem. What would you do?
So marijuana, obviously, like, all the politicians always say day one, and they never do anything, right? And it took Biden 3 years to like reclassify, so to declassify marijuana.
And Schumer wouldn't do it because it wasn't quite good enough. And it's like, you could do it right now. You could do it right now, Schumer.
Like and by the way, the Democratic leadership is so wrong so often. 70% of Americans want to legalize marijuana, period. Okay. What part of 70% don't you guys understand? Like, I've threatened to run for president. We'll see how that turns out in a couple of days. And if I run for president, I'm going to do something radical. I'm going to say I'm only going to do popular things. So if you're left wing and you want me to defund the police, I'm not going to do it. And get it to 70%, then great, we'll have a conversation. You're a right winger and you want to put up electric fences and alligators at the border. No, sorry, not going to do it. Get it to 70%. Okay, I'm not going to do it. But I'm going to do things that are super popular and no other politician does because they're controlled by corporations. So
that is a very interesting position, to only do things that everybody already agrees with, which, by the way, there's a lot. There's so much stuff. Like there's a phrase, I think Brink Lindsay used it, low-hanging fruit guarded by dragons. Like, there are a lot of things, like marijuana is an example of this, where, like, if you were to do basic polling, the American people are like, what? Like, you could talk to, like, Oklahoma, where I'm from, legalized it. And it was because you started talking to, like, random people in Oklahoma, and they're like, is it in my own guy's own garage? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, is it significantly different than alcohol? People are less violent. Okay. Like, that's the common position.
Yeah. So last thing on this. So marijuana is a layup, and these idiot Democrats and Republicans that don't do it are abhorrent. And it's like we put millions of people in jail, took away their freedom, based on the equivalent of having a Coors Light, right? Mm-hmm. So in terms of psychedelics and the art of drugs, that I would then seek counsel if I were the president, okay? And so psychedelics, I have in a similar place that you do, but I would want to confirm that. I would want to read more of the studies, be absolutely sure before we declassify or reclassify. But I think that they've been demonized in a way that is nonsensical. But I would want to confirm that. In terms of the art of drugs like meth and fentanyl, it's literally killing us. And so I'm not sure decriminalizing is the right path there. But I would look at all solutions to actually attack that scourge, because those things kill people. And no ands, ifs, or buts. And we have to find the best way to fight them. As yet, some ways might be counterintuitive, but I would need a lot more study and research to verify the right path.
And again, I think you probably have the kind of median voter position. I am an outlier in that regard. From my perspective, it's not even so much a deontological position that, like, you should be able to, like, I do think you own your own body. However, I look at it and go, I think the cure is worse than the disease at the moment with drugs. Like, people are still dying from fentanyl. Okay, it sounds like we've got some overlap there. From your perspective, if I am for decriminalizing everything and treating it as a medical problem, am I more progressive? Am I radical? Like, it sounds to me like you're the moderate and I'm the progressive on this issue, where I'm more progressive. How would you phrase that?
Yeah, I think that it's fair to say that you're more progressive on that issue than I am. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. I think we probably have very similar outlook on the military, which is that we don't need to be everywhere and we don't need to spend half of the global defense budget, that we could get by on a much smaller military.
Yeah, so there's a lot of devil in those details. So I wouldn't the bases I would look at one by one. But I don't think that's where most of the money goes from. I don't think that's where most of the problem is. I think the biggest problem is our wars of offense, where we needlessly start wars we have no business being involved in. And so we definitely have an agreement there. Secondly, the Pentagon never passes an audit. Half their budget, which is gigantic, about $400 some odd billion, they go, well, we don't know where it went. No, brothers, you're gonna find out. You're gonna tell us where that goddamn money went. If not, you're not getting it. Okay? There is no such thing as, oops, honey, I lost $400 billion and I lost it every single year after year, and I'm not going to be accountable to the American people, and I'm going to put their money in the trash and I'm going to burn it. And of course, they're not doing that. They're stuffing it into their corrupt pockets. the Pentagon is easily the most corrupt part of the government.
And when we say Pentagon, we're also including like defense contractors and just the military-industrial complex in general.
Yeah. And guys, look, the Pentagon is not the core of the problem. The defense contractors are the core of the problem.
Agreed.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so they co-opt the Pentagon by getting the generals fat contracts the minute they retire, right? So almost all the generals go work for defense contractors, get paid millions of dollars by them. And so when they're in office, when they're generaling, to make up a fun word, and they know in the back of their heads, these guys are going to make me rich. So I better funnel hundreds of billions of dollars to them. And who gives a damn if the thing works or doesn't work, or we, keep track of the money? Who cares? These guys are going to pay for my house in McLean and Fairfax. Okay. So that's the corruption nobody in mainstream media talks about.
Okay. I think we're probably in agreement on that. The military-industrial complex. We're probably very similar on like prison-industrial complex. A lot of the things in the book, I think the vast majority of people, including you and me, would agree on, which is that courts shouldn't show preference based on skin color. That I don't think you use the phrase corporate cronyism, but what I would call corporate cronyism of the government giving hands out to large corporations. We're both very opposed to that. Command economy. Do you think that the government should be saying how much steel we produce, or we should be investing more in solar panels versus in natural gas or something else? Like, how active do you want top-down management of the economy to be?
Okay. Almost none at all. I'll get to almost in a second. Okay. But in terms of command economy, hell no. No government has shown the ability to run a central economy efficiently over the course of time and set up the right incentives and disincentives. It almost always devolves into a dictatorship. No interest in the command economy at all. I call myself a democratic capitalist, and you're absolutely right about the cronyism, and I did mention it in at least one or two parts of the book.
You bring up the concept multiple times, to be sure, yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of the term, I mainly call it corporatism.
Right,
but it's the same thing. Crony capitalism and corporatism is the same.
Okay.
And so I'm dead set against that. I think the great majority of the subsidies we have are horseshit and are just nothing but corruption, where, whether it's big sugar, and that sounds funny, but it's true.
No, for sure. It's like two guys in Florida get like $10 billion a year for a substance that makes us no healthier, that almighty God never intended to grow in America to begin with. Like, it's a ridiculous subsidy.
100%. All those subsidies are garbage. The oil companies still get about $20 billion a year. Why? They're the most profitable companies in the history of the world, and I have to take my tax money and give it to those sons of bitches who I happen to think are destroying the world? No, I do not want to do that. The only part that's the almost is sometimes there are nascent industries, which, by the way, the oil and gas industry was about 100 years ago, okay? Right. Where you go, hey, it needs a little startup capital here, and the markets are not perfectly efficient in providing the startup capital. But by the way, when Americans provide the startup capital, we should also get equity in those companies. So why do we always give the subsidies, but we never get the money back? Then for the ones that don't work, all of our money is gone. For the ones that do work, they keep all the profits. Wait a minute. That's not how capitalism works. Yeah. So the government acting as almost a startup fund.
So sort of an incubator in terms of industries that don't have capital. Like, I brought on the former VP of NASA, and her take on it was that eventually you actually want to hand stuff over to the private sector, but there's an initial period where there's not sufficient capital, and NASA does a good job of doing that. So
100%. And I'll give you an even bigger example that's a little bit adjacent here topic, which is the banks in 2008. I would have nationalized all of them.
You would have nationalized them? Like, we'd have a national bank of America? Okay, you lost me.
Hold on. Hear me out. Let me finish this out.
Okay, sorry.
So I would have nationalized them because they were deeply incompetent. They crashed the American economy, the entire global economy, and those arrogant pricks demanded bonuses for crashing the economy and costing us, 14 million jobs? But the only reason to nationalize them is not to keep them, Andrew. It's to straighten out the ship and go, okay, once we are going to release you back into the market, make it private again, we provided the capital, the American people did. So we're going to own some percentage of it. Silent partner. I don't want any government official telling you how to run your bank. Okay. But hey, the American people put up all the money. And where is it right now? It's in Goldman Sachs' hands. It's in JP Morgan Chase's hands. Where the hell's our shit, right? So I would have cleaned them up, gotten a huge percentage of the equity for the American people because it's their money, and then made them private again.
Okay. So maybe like, I don't know that I would have been in favor of the bailouts because I'm worried about economic term that escapes me at this time. But basically, like, look, we're going to give you the money, but what we're in effect doing is we're buying the American government by giving you this money is buying shares in your company. You don't have to take it, but if you want it, we are now on the board, and the American government is going to play the stewardship role with the money we are giving you. That gives us buy-in at the table, and then once we get it to a certain point, we'll leave. Something to that effect?
100%. And I give you another example that's even more actionable and very easy to do that we don't do. The drug companies. We help them with their research in universities that American government finances. We give them direct money from the U.S. government to finance research. And okay, I love it. They create a lot of great drugs that we need. But wait a minute, why don't we get any of the profits? If we paid for the research and development and we paid for you to quote unquote create that drug, you didn't even create it. Half the time it was government scientists that created it. Oh, the American taxpayer that paid for it doesn't get any money. The drug company executives get all the money. Why? Why doesn't make any sense at all? So yes, we need, the reason I call it democratic capitalism, Andrew, is because democracy needs to check capitalism. Otherwise, it runs amok and becomes corporatism, crony capitalism, etc. They capture the government. No, the government has to be in charge, but it has to be an honest government where your representatives actually represent you and demand the equity from those drug companies, banks, etc. when we endlessly bail them out.
So in the book, one of the other things that I like, that I was surprised by, and I'm glad that you set the record straight with me, because I was laboring under a misconception about you. You say you are a capitalist, you believe in free enterprise and markets. You talk about human nature, and I agree with you that people want to work the least amount of hours to maximize the most of the money that they're going to get, and that's something essential to human nature. And for that reason, some things just work better in the private sector. We're in agreement on all of that. I think when you were running for Congress, Bernie Sanders endorsed you. He seems like he's kind of on your wing of things. I do not get that vibe from Bernie Sanders. Like if we're both running for office or whatever, and you come in and you're like, hey, I'm a capitalist. I think markets work. I just want to make sure that if the government's paying a corporation, the American people get equity in it, and anti-competitive behaviors, the FTC regulates that, and fraud and things like. Okay, great, negative externalities. But like with Bernie Sanders and those folks, I get a very strong just markets are evil. Markets are inherently exploitative. That really turns me off. Am I missing something? Would Bernie Sanders describe himself as a capitalist?
No, he wouldn't. But so let me explain the difference. First of all, the word socialism is greatly misunderstood. It's applied to everything, and there's no distinctions that are made. It's like the conversation we had about Republican voters and Republican factions in the beginning. So Venezuela is socialist, and I think it's a disaster. Finland is socialist, and I think it's a lovely country. In fact, almost all Northern Europe is considered socialist, and Northern Europe has the happiest countries in the world.
So at the beginning of the conversation, I said we were going to use your terms and labels today. So I will accept this definition, although I would normally quibble it. Could you please define socialism for us at this time so I know what label I am using?
Yeah. So I think what Bernie is advocating for is the same kind of whatever label you put on it. He puts the label democratic socialist on countries like Denmark, Finland, Norway, and their economic model, which is in reality, of course, a mixed economy. Because if you don't have a mixed economy, you either have out-of-control capitalism, which will last a couple of years until it turns into corporatism, okay? Or you'll have communism. And communism, there is no private property, complete state control, etc. So both socialism and what we colloquially call capitalism are some versions of a mixed economy. And the question is, how mixed? What should be private and what should be public, right? And so the reason I say there isn't much difference between Bernie's democratic socialism and my democratic capitalism is because as things stand today in America, we both agree to very popular policies like paid family leave, where the government helps a little bit around the edges. You got a baby, you need 12 weeks off, etc. Northern European countries do that. Universal health care. Almost all developed countries do that, but America doesn't. and we want to get there. Where we would diverge later, if in this fantastical world, or whether I won or Bernie's won, and then we're having disputes later, is if Bernie went further, which I suspect he would, right? And said, well, I think that the government can handle this well a little bit better. I think that monopoly should be broken up. And we might have disagreements around the edges. But I know Bernie's not saying government takes over. You don't have private property. I got your car now. Okay. No, he's not saying that. There are some who say that, but not really in standard American politics.
Well,
like
I think
AOC, et cetera, doesn't say that.
While I disagreed with a lot of the tactics in your book, I think the phrase democratic capitalism is a much better one than democratic socialism. As I like the economic definition that I have normally is the government owns and controls the means of production. So I would like Northern Europe, I would say, is a market economy with a social safety net. And so if you were to say I am a democratic capitalist who wants a social safety net, I'm like, hey, me too. That sounds great. Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like I know we're about to run out of time, and I know you're a very, very busy man, so I don't want to soak up too much of it, but I will say you've indicated to me you're flirting with a run for the presidency. First, can you legally do that? Like you were born in Istanbul to Turkish parents. Is there a legal route for you to do it, or would it be like a protest thing if you go?
Yeah, no. So this is an enormous misconception, and one of the reasons I'm very seriously considering running. There's 25 million Americans who are naturalized citizens, and every one of us has heard, you can't run for president, right? And we probably, just ask anyone in that category, we've all probably heard that about 200 times in our lives. Yeah. Whether we come from Britain or we come from, Cuba or Turkey, doesn't matter. We all hear the same exact thing. It's an interesting thing that unites us. And it turns out, I read the case law. It's not at all true. It's the Schneider v. Russ says the Fifth Amendment amended the earlier part of the Constitution. Naturalized citizens have 100% of the same rights as natural-born citizens.
Interesting.
And the case law is overwhelming. So what I'm going to do is, if I run, I'm going to run, and I'm going to take it to the Supreme Court. And very, very likely I will win. And when I win, we partly liberated 25 million Americans.
I'm totally unfamiliar with the case law, so I can't speak to that, but I would love that outcome. I think it's a stupid atavism. I think the original reason it was put in was we were afraid that a prince would come over and run for president. And I think it's ridiculous. How old were you when you moved to the United States?
I was 8.
Okay, so you were here as long as I've been here. There's absolutely no reason there should be any difference between us in terms of our legal abilities to run for office.
Yeah, and
like Arnold Schwarzenegger. If he wanted to run for president right now, I would put him well ahead of all the other Republicans.
By the way, he does want to run for president. And
really?
Yeah. And so my guess is my two biggest allies are going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger and Elon Musk. Both naturalized citizens, both think that they can't run when in fact they can. I don't want Elon running. Arnold, on the other hand, is kind of an interesting character, okay? But it doesn't matter what I want. What matters is democracy, the Constitution, and what is fair. And I'll give you last examples here. Ted Lieu's a congressman from California, colonel in the United States Air Force, okay? Came here when he was 3 years old and grew up in Cleveland. Right. Is he really loyal to the Taiwanese government? That's insane, right?
Yeah.
Rahm Emanuel served in the Israeli Defense Forces, but was born in America. So he's allowed to run, even though he served in a foreign military. Patrick Bet-David, a right-winger podcaster, came here when he was around, I think, 12 years old, or in that ballpark, 8 to 12. He's an Armenian Christian from Iran. He served in the 101st Airborne, but he's not allowed to run.
Yeah. Or we could flip it. Winston Churchill and Boris Johnson were both eligible to run for president because Winston Churchill's mom was American, Boris Johnson's mom was American. So they both, even though they were clearly British and never lived in the United States, had more legal rights than any of the people you previously described.
Yeah, and the idea that Patrick Bet-David is more loyal to Iran is hilarious and not remotely true, right? So everybody knows it's unfair. They just don't know that the case law agrees with them. So we're going to try to fix that.
That is fascinating, and I'll let you go. You've been very generous with your time, Cenk. Cenk, I really enjoyed talking to you. You're a big figure in media. You're an independent guy in media. I am very glad that we could figure out ways to talk and kind of get along, and I feel the world's a little bit nicer having us talk. So thanks for coming on.
No problem. So if people want to get the book, they can go to tyt.com/justice. TYT is obviously short for the Young Turks. So tyt.com/justice. The book's called Justice is Coming. And then stick around, Google Cenk Uygur in a couple of days, see what happens. And Andrew, it was a lovely conversation. I love having intellectual conversations where we, agree on what we agree on and agree on what we disagree on. And we act like Americans and sort things out with our ideas.
Hey, if you ever want anybody to be that AB5 goes too far type dude to come on and hang out and explain my qualms about things from a benevolent position, I'm happy to do that. If you're in Austin, Texas, look me up, and good luck.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Okay, that went pretty well, right? Patrons, I would love to hear what you thought of Cenk in the comments. I don't think we would be in the same political party, even if we get rid of all the labels and things. I do think there are some significant differences, but, maybe the show could have been more argumentative, but at least it wasn't dumb arguments, right? We didn't end up shouting each other over dumb stuff. Non-patrons, real quick, do me a favor. Google Cenk Young Turks. That's spelled Cenk, Young Turks. Try to find an interview Cenk has done where they didn't end up shouting at each other or interrupting each other, because I think I have actually accomplished something very novel today in today's chat. If you agree, please go to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. You will not only keep the operation alive and luminous, you will get bonus episodes. Finally, for anybody new to the program, given today's content, given the kickoff about polemicism, I highly, highly recommend you check out an episode of this program called Was Abraham Lincoln Left-Wing or Right-Wing?, in which I interview Hiram Lewis on his book, The Myth of the Left-Right Spectrum. I think that largely countermands most of the problems I would have had with the worldview purported today, and I have linked to that episode in today's episode description. Okay, that's the show. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Eric Stipe, who edited today's episode. Thank you, Cenk Uygur, for coming on. Until next time, I've been Andrew Heaton, and so have you.